Those long uneven lines, standing as patiently as if they were stretched outside the oval of Villa Park. The crowns of hats, the sun on moustached arctic faces, grinning as if it were all an August bank holiday lark. And the shut shops, the bleached established names in the sun blinds, the farthings and sovereigns, and dark-clothed children at play, called off the kings and queens, the tin advertisements, of cocoa and twist, and the pubs wide open all day. And the countryside not caring, the place names all hazed over with flowering grasses and fields, shadowing Domesday lines. Under weeks' restless silence, and the differently dressed servants with tiny rooms and huge houses, and the dust behind limousines. Never such innocence, never before or since, has changed yourself to pass without a word. The men, leaving the gardens tidy, the thousands of marriages lasting a little while longer. Never such innocence again. Ah, hello. That was the poem 1914 by Philip Larkin. And MCMXIV, or 1914 in Roman numerals, is a poem written by Philip Larkin and published in his book The Whitsun Weddings in 1964. Considering that Larkin was born in 1922, he missed the First World War by 4 years, but grew up surrounded by victims and veterans from the war. And of course he lived through the Second World War himself, although he never fought nor was accepted into the military on account of his poor eyesight. This means that Larkin is only able to write from a civilian point of view. Larkin often wrote for his peers in university, meaning that the target audience for 1914 is ordinary civilians who were not able to experience the war themselves. The poem begins by describing older men standing in lines as they sign up at the local recruiting office with smiles on their faces, treating it all as a big game. Children with names such as George and Elizabeth run about and play outside as the tin ads sway in the breeze. The ground itself doesn't care. Its field and grasses have grown over the scars left behind from past wars, and the men eventually leave with plans of returning in a couple of months, unaware that their lives will only last a little longer, and that they're leaving to never return. The world will never be the same again, and never again will men be so unaware of the consequences of war. The theme of the poem is about how innocent the world was in 1914, and how quickly this innocence was unnecessarily lost due to the war. This is reinforced through the imagery of the smiling older men, so unaware that they're signing up to die, and the children happily playing outside, and it's also directly referenced in the last stanza, with quotes such as, "Never such innocence, never before or since has changed itself to pass without a word, and never such innocence again." Despite drawing happy images throughout the poem, 1914 still has quite a sad and dark atmosphere about it. This is due to the poem being written in past tense, implying that all these happy images aren't there anymore, and through the context that the audience knows what's going to happen to these men in the lines, and that the beautiful countryside isn't going to stay beautiful for long. Despite this, for 3/4 of the poem, Larkin's tone is rather indifferent and nearly happy at times, and that is until the final stanza, when the tone switches to suddenly become rather sombre, emphasising the message of that final stanza. 1914 is written in 4 8-line stanzas, where in each stanza the 4th and 8 lines rhyme. There's no pattern to the amount of syllables per line or anything else in that manner. However, nearly half the lines end in plurals, showing how there's a lot of everything at the time, and how there isn't going to be for much longer. In the first stanza, Larkin uses 2 similes comparing the men of the recruiting crews to that of people lining up to get into a football match. This shows how the men think it's going to be a game or a grand adventure, as well as alludes to the trenches that the men will soon be lining themselves up in very soon. Larkin then zooms out and establishes the imagery that's very stereotypical of the pre-war era, and uses the imagery of children playing to really emphasise how happy and uncaring and unprepared the world was at the time. Larkin then zooms out further again and personifies the countryside itself, stating how it's lived through wars before, but never one of this scale. 1914 leaves the reader reflecting on not only what war meant to the millions of men who fought and died in it, but also what it meant to the civilians back home, whose lives will also change forever, and often for the worse. The wives and partners who would never be done waiting for their sweethearts to come home, and the children who can no longer carelessly play outside in the sun, but will be constantly turning their heads to the sky at the slightest hint of an engine's roar. So no, never such innocence again.